Hello, my name is Dr. DeSalvo, and our topic today is 504s and IEPs. As I began as a special education teacher, I didn't nearly know everything about 504s and IEPs that I needed to know, but one piece of advice I wanted to give to you is that counselors and special education case managers should always be in your hip pocket. You should continue to be consistent in your communication with them, and if any issues arise, please keep them in the loop. So today, in order to give you an authentic experience about 504s and IEPs, I brought in a counselor, Ashley Demery, to talk about 504s, and a special education teacher, Jordan Block, to talk about IEPs. So here goes.
Hi, my name is Ashley Demery, and I'm a school counselor at Woodson High School in Fairfax County. I'm going to share the basics of a 504 plan and some practical things that you may need to know as a teacher for your classroom and for your students. To start, what does a 504 look like? So on the screen, I have a copy of what a 504 plan may look like. You can see a few different things on a 504 plan. You can see what the student's disability is, and this can be a number of different things. It can be a learning disability. It can be mental health related. It could be physical health related, such as being qualified for diabetes. These are kind of the main reasons why a student would qualify for a 504 plan. So you can see on the screen, this is a sample 504, and up at the top, you can see listed the student's impairment. And I just listed a few common diagnoses that students may qualify for, like ADHD, anxiety, depression. The main part is the classroom accommodations that you'll find in the box at the bottom. And so I listed common classroom accommodations that you may find. So the first one is preferential seating to minimize distractions. So preferential seating could be close to the teacher. It could be away from doors or windows because those are distracting to the student. Or I've seen students needing to be away from the fish tank that's in the biology room because that's a distraction to them. So preferential seating, even though it's a common classroom accommodation, it could look different for each individual student. Another common one is copies of class notes. So when a student has issue or difficulty focusing in class, they may be distracted. It may be helpful for them to have a copy of classroom notes right in front of them so they can focus right on what you're saying instead of trying to focus on you and taking notes at the same time. So it kind of eliminates one of the things that they need to focus on. The third and fourth one, extended time, are very common as well. So the first one is extended time to turn in classroom assignments. And I just listed one extra class period to turn in assignments. The second extended time is for tests and quizzes. So I listed up to 50%. So a student may need to take more time on their test just because it takes them longer to go through each of the questions. So 50% would mean if you had a test that was 60 minutes, this particular student would have 60 minutes plus another 30 minutes. Another accommodation is allowing breaks. This one in particular, allowing breaks to get water, to refocus for instruction. So again, those students who need to regain focus, we all know it's really hard to sit through a class for a long period of time. So building in those breaks for 504 students is helpful for them to maintain that focus in class. And the last accommodation is small group testing. So in our school, we do state exams in a very large setting, like over 100 students are testing in one time in the gym. And so this can be very distracting for students. So a small group testing format would be where students are just with a few other students or 30 students or less. These are just the common accommodations that I come across, but you may find some other accommodations that may help students or come across other accommodations on a student's plan. So before a student enters your classroom, you should have a copy of the 504 to review their accommodations before they walk into your classroom. In Fairfax, teachers are able to view 504s within our electronic system. I know other districts may have a different process. I know before our 504s were electronic, counselors had to email the plans to all of the teachers. So once you have the plan, you must review the plan and implement all of the accommodations listed on the 504. So if you come across an accommodation that you're not sure about or what it means, you can always reach out to the counselor, who's usually the case manager. So the counselor is responsible for making sure accommodations are implemented, any changes that need to happen, or answer any questions that teachers or staff may have about those accommodations. So each year, the 504 is going to be reviewed annually by a knowledgeable committee. So on the 504 plan, you can see on this plan, it's in the middle of the page here, when the student qualified and then when the reevaluation date is. Reevaluation date may be a meeting that needs to happen by that certain date. And you can also just quickly glance at the top, the review date of this 504. The date will be posted there. So that's when the meeting needs to happen. So the case manager, usually the counselor, will conduct this meeting and coordinate the meeting. And this committee that is included at the 504 meeting includes teachers, parents, the student, and the counselor. We discuss appropriate accommodations that relate to the student's disability. 504s can be reviewed more than once a year if a student needs to add or remove accommodations. This is common when a student is newly qualified for a 504. So it may take that student more than one meeting to make sure the right accommodations are in place for that student and all of their classes. If you suspect a student may have a disability and they don't have a 504 or IEP, you may want to talk to that student's counselor. In Fairfax, the process of beginning a 504 or IEP starts with the counselor. And so each district may have a little bit of a different process. So you just want to speak with somebody, how do you start that process? How do you start that conversation? So that should be the first stop if you ever suspect a disability. So these were just wrapping up a few points that are important about a 504 and a 504 plan, and things that you may need to know for your classroom and your role as a teacher. So I wish you best of luck with your students in your class.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jordan Black, and I am a special education teacher. I'm going to talk a little bit about our IEPs, our individualized education plans, and we're going to have a brief overview of what an IEP is. We're going to talk about who's on the team, including attendees and the information that each attendee would provide. And then also we're going to talk specifically about roles in terms of general education teacher or special education teacher. All right, to start us off, what is an IEP? So you may already have some background information on what an IEP is, which is awesome. But just to clarify some things and get us all on the same page, an IEP is an individualized education plan. It's a plan that's written, drafted to describe the special education and related services, and it's specifically designed to meet the unique needs of each individual. So as in the name, IEPs are very individualized documents, and it's going to document those needs of the student with a disability or with multiple disabilities. Also, these IEP meetings happen annually, so IEP meetings must happen annually. But if there's a change that needs to happen to the IEP after an annual meeting or prior to an annual meeting, those can definitely happen, and we would call those addendums. Addendums can happen with a meeting or they can happen without. And actually, any person on the team can call a meeting at any time. So that could be a gen ed teacher, the special education teacher case manager, it could be the parents, the student can call a meeting. So anybody that's a part of this IEP team can call a meeting at any time, and addendums can happen. All right, so who's on the IEP team? Well, the IEP team can be made up of several individuals, but on the next slide, we're going to talk about who's required and who's elective. So as far as who's required, we need the case manager. Typically, the case manager is a special education teacher. We'll have the principal designee, and the principal designee is typically going to be the special education department chair, but it could also be an administrator. It could be the principal, so who's ever acting in that position in a meeting, and they'll kind of take notes on the present level of performance page. So that's kind of what the principal designee does. And we'll talk a little bit about these different pages that I'm mentioning when I show an actual IEP. The other required team member is a general education teacher. And you'll notice that that has an asterisk next to it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the required attendees and why there's that asterisk next to the general education teacher. So as you'll see, these are all school staff that's being mentioned in terms of the required attendees. So I will say, we definitely, in high school IEP specifically, we definitely want the student there because they're going to provide a lot of needed input on their IEP, including the transition plan, and they're going to kind of guide their IEP, and they're going to have a lot of information to provide during their IEP and share because it's directed by them. If you're in an elementary setting or a middle school setting, the student may not be at the IEP, but the parents usually will be. But for an IEP to kind of go into practice, all that is required is a case manager, a principal designee, and a general education teacher. So again, most meetings will have the parent there. If you're in the high school setting, parent or guardian, if you're in the high school setting, you'll definitely most likely have the student there. But for an IEP to kind of get placed into practice, those are the 3 required members. So the general education teacher has an asterisk next to it because although it's required, there's a couple ways to kind of conduct a meeting or have a meeting without a general education teacher. So that could happen if the parents or guardians consent to not having a general education teacher present, or if a student has a specific need or has a high level of needs to the point where they don't have a general education teacher on their schedule, then again, the parents can consent to not having a general education teacher. In terms of elective attendees, we definitely, I think it's important to have a number of attendees attend, especially, because they can provide different information about the student and it's helpful to kind of guide these conversations. So elective attendees include counselor. The counselor in a high school setting is definitely going to be able to explain those diploma options and things like that and kind of suggest or help with class scheduling. Administrators can be at the IEP meeting, and then related service provider. So that could look like a speech pathologist, an employment and transition representative, a clinician. So there can be multiple elective attendees, and sometimes these elective attendees have a lot of great information to provide. Sometimes schedules don't always work out that way that we can get all these members here. But as you can see, the IEP team consists of a wide array of people, and also it can be a pretty large group. So now I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what is your role. So what is your role either as a general education teacher, and what is the role of the special education teacher / case manager? So as a general education teachers are very integral to the meeting because they can provide a knowledge base about the content area. They can, kind of say what's going on in the classroom. This is what we're teaching. This is what we're learning. And this is the standard curriculum. They also will be able to describe how the student with disabilities performs in the general education content. And that's going to be extremely important when we start talking about least restrictive environment and placement. And I'll be able to kind of show those different tabs and aspects on the IEP when I pull that up. So that's super important when we get to that aspect, because the general education teacher sees students who are in the standard curriculum, and they also see students in the standard curriculum with disabilities, so they can see what level of support maybe the student needs or what the level of support that the student is benefiting from. The general education teacher, during the meeting, you'll also want to kind of talk about the pace of the class. you know, we've zipped through these or we've kind of slowed down through these just to see if that student with disability or disabilities, or describe how they're kind of accessing that curriculum based on the pace that's kind of being provided. I will also say that this is extremely important when we talk about tests and classroom accommodations and modifications. This is a very important aspect when we're looking at things like extended time and test taking and things like that. So again, I'll kind of touch on that when I'm able to pull up the IEP. The general education teacher can also provide, examples about the dynamics of the class. They will be able to provide information about, peer interaction and things like that. So there's a lot of good information that can come from the general education teacher, and it's super important when we're making some pretty serious decisions about the IEP in terms of accommodations and things like that. Another great thing to bring to the IEP meeting or be prepared to kind of share are work samples. So this becomes very important when we're looking at reading, writing, and math, because this will kind of be evidence to show where the student's current level of performance is. So the general education teacher is extremely important to the IEP meeting, and we always look forward to getting feedback from our general education teachers. All right, so the special education teacher, case manager, is one of those integral people to the IEP meetings as well. The special education teacher is going to be that point of contact for pretty much everyone. So for the student, for the parents, for the school staff. So that case manager is going to connect with the student often. That case manager is going to have a pretty good relationship with the parents. And also the case manager is going to be a great resource for teachers to kind of share that information. The case manager will gather that information and be able to kind of use that when drafting the IEP, or use that to kind of bring up at the meeting. So I will say this, when we talked about the general education teacher, we only need one general education teacher at the meeting. So the case manager will solicit feedback from all teachers of the student and be able to share that at the meeting, in addition to what the general education teacher present at the meeting will be able to share. So the special education teacher or case manager also may coordinate the meeting. So in some instances, the special education teacher might reach out to the general education teacher and other members on the team to schedule a meeting. Sometimes that can be done by a scheduling assistant. The special education teacher will also, in most instances, lead the IEP meeting. So the special education teacher will kind of jump through the different tabs of the IEP and kind of guide the discussion during the IEP meeting. Also, they will draft the IEP document. And drafting the IEP document, there's going to be several things that they gather from the student, from the parent, and from the teachers, and they'll be able to provide a draft to kind of talk through. And when I say draft, usually it's just the goals that they're drafting and maybe the transition plan if you're in the high school setting. Also, IEP goals are monitored on a quarterly basis. So there will be 4 progress reports that go home throughout the school year. And based on what those goals are in, or what areas of need those goals are in, the special education teacher will reach out to other teachers. Maybe it's English, maybe it's math, if those are goal specific. Or the special education teacher could reach out to all of the students' teachers just to gather information. And again, that depends on what the goal area is in. Finally, the special education teacher is ultimately responsible for making sure that that IEP is implemented correctly. So as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, an IEP is a legally binding document. So we definitely have to monitor and make sure that that IEP is being implemented properly. And again, that's kind of where the annual IEP meetings come in, and also where those addendums come in, just so that we can make sure that we're best meeting the needs of the student. All right, so as promised, I am going to go ahead and show you an IEP. The IEP that I'm going to show you is actually used for training purposes. So this is not an actual IEP of the student. It's used for training purposes. So I'll kind of explain that when I pull that up on the screen.
This IEP, again, is used for training purposes, so you're not going to see something that's completely filled out, which is okay, but the purpose of this is just to kind of walk you through what the agenda of an IEP meeting will be and some of the pages that you might see when you are in an IEP meeting. I will also say that this is a PDF copy of an IEP, so this is what the IEP looks like after it's printed out. But when you're in the meeting, typically the case manager, special education teacher, will be presenting the document through an internet program and kind of jumping through the different tabs. So when you first enter an IEP meeting, it will start with introductions. And as you can see here, we have the IEP cover page. And on this page will be some of the information listed about the student, including their grade level, parent or guardian's names will be on here. And you will also see at the bottom who participated in the IEP. So you will see who is a part of the team. And as you can see, we have the parent, student, principal designee, special education teacher, general education teacher as kind of standard, but definitely we love to have other members of the team because we like to present that complete picture of the student. So this is the first thing that you'll see. If you are in a high school IEP, the next thing that you'll see is the transition page or transition goals. And these are drafted by talking to the student and kind of figuring out what they're interested in, what they would like to pursue in the future, and that kind of drives the IEP. It will also drive, what classes we look at and things like that. So on this page again, if you are in a high school IEP, the student will take over at this point, and that's what we encourage. The student will read their strengths, their needs. They will read their post-secondary goals, what their interests are, and they will also be able to share their career goal. So their career goal is current, and that career goal can change throughout high school. So they don't have to stick to that career goal. It can change at every annual IEP. If you happen to be in an elementary or middle school IEP, then the transition plan or page may be left out. All right, so the next thing that I want to take a look at is the present level of performance page. So this page will be kind of a note-taking page. The principal designee at the meeting will be taking notes here throughout the meeting. Whatever comes up, whatever would like to be shared on the present level of performance page, that will go here. We'll also list the student's eligibility. We may list things like class schedule for a current year and next year. So all of that information will be found here. So it looks blank here, but this would typically be filled out with the meeting notes. I would like to take a look at the goals. So here there are kind of two different pages here, but the annual goals, this is what we'll be monitoring quarterly. So there are 4 progress reports that go out related to an update on the student goal progress. And this is where teachers come into play. This is where related service providers come into play to kind of share that information. So what the case manager will do is typically reach out to those teachers and related service providers to provide goal progress updates, but also the teacher will reach out to those people to draft these goals. So typically case managers, special education teachers are drafting goals or related service providers. So like speech, or maybe a clinician may even help out with a behavior goal. Okay, so when we start talking about curriculum or classroom accommodations and modifications, this is where we usually turn the floor over to the general education teacher, because that general education teacher is going to be able to kind of provide a glimpse of how the student is doing in accessing the general education setting. So the teacher will chime in about accommodations and modifications that the student is currently using, and will also share accommodations and modifications that they think the student would be able to benefit from. All right, another page that I would like to take a look at is the least restrictive environment. So this is a big one. So when we draft these IEPs, we think about placement and we think about where the student will be getting the level of support that they need, but will not be over supported. So this is something that we talk through with the family. And then at the bottom of this page, we will see where the student actually accesses the general education setting. So we will note that there. We also have the services page, and on this page, we will document where the student is receiving special education support. Placement is where we'll talk about what classes the student is specifically accessing. You can see at the top whether that's general education classes, that would include team talk classes, or if that's special education classes, those are special classes, or whether there's a greater level of support there in the public separate day or private day schooling. Let's see. Okay, so this is the last page that will pop up in the IEP meeting, and this is where the students or the parents and everybody on the team is kind of informed of the due process rights. So we'll read that top paragraph, and then we'll kind of leave the meeting for, if this is happening in person, we'll kind of leave it open for parents to print and sign right at the meeting, or parents can take the document home and review it and return it after they have that opportunity to review. So that's kind of how the IEP meeting goes. That wasn't necessarily all of the tabs or all of the pages that you would see, but it's some of the more important pages and tabs that you would see and where the conversation would kind of happen and take place. So we typically like all of the members of the team to stay until the end of the IEP. IEPs normally take 45 minutes to an hour. That could differ based on the level of need of the student or things like that, but it's typically 45 minutes to an hour, and the team stays the entire time.
I want to say thank you so much. I hope that kind of clarifies some things about IEPs in terms of what an IEP is, who's a part of the team, and kind of the role of the different stakeholders and teachers in the meeting. Thank you so much.
As a final part of our presentation, I wanted to make you aware that there's a lot of legality surrounding 504s and IEPs, and so I have created a drive which you see attached. And I ask that you please review some of these attachments, some of the laws, as they do impact your practices every day.